Shonna, how are you?
I'm great, Al. It's great to be here with you again. Thank you.
Well, it's great that you are sharing on this topic. I mean, your credentials in leader development and leader effectiveness and systems thinking and workforce adaptation, all these things need to be considered when we're talking about performance management and what you're calling performance engineering. So, if you would, brief introduction about yourself and what we'll be talking about today.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. And it's fun to be here with you talking about this topic because I know you and I have both been talking about this for many, many years. So it'll be fun to explore some of the issues together. My name is Shonna Waters. I am the CEO and co-founder of Fractional Insights, and we're a science-backed advisory and consulting firm that's really helping organizations through this time of uncertainty and change as we navigate the future of work.
Well, you're doing extraordinary work with Aaron Etaw, and I certainly celebrate both of you as you're producing, the Angst Index and a lot of other insights and ideas on how to mitigate risk and do things differently in this time of tumultuous change. So I'm going to get out of your way, let you talk, and then we'll talk about it. And if you're joining us live, by all means, tee up your questions and comments in the comments section, and we'll get to as many as we can. So, Shauna, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Al. So I'll share a little bit about our perspective on performance engineering, and then I'm excited to dive into conversation with you. But yeah, so in just about every conversation I'm having these days with leaders, performance comes up. So I want to start by framing a fundamental paradox that every leader feels. And that is that we invest millions in our people and that's through technology, through training, through leadership development, all in the pursuit of high performance. And yet, the very same systems that we rely on to drive that performance are often what is holding us back. So, today I'm going to talk about why that is, at least from our perspective, and how we can move from managing the paradox to truly engineering a solution. So, the stakes couldn't be higher. Research consistently shows that up to 90% of organizations fail to execute their strategies successfully. And the gap between, what this ambition is, this big vision, and the reality represents a big loss of potential. So it's a frustration that I consistently hear from the leaders that I talk to. Recently, one chief people officer told me that, we can't get people to differentiate for rewards and that we don't trust our managers to actually make those decisions. And that's unfortunate given that that's a big part of what we hire these managers to do. And then another, even more blunt conversation that I had after a very painful workforce reduction that the company had gone through was that the chief people officer said that if they had a true or a real performance management process, they'd be able to reduce the bottom performers without having to engage in these kinds of restructuring efforts. So this is the performance paradox that I'm referring to. We have these systems that are supposed to drive performance, but in reality, they create friction and mistrust and ultimately a failure to execute. Now, for decades, we've approached this as a people problem. And what I mean by that is that we assume that when strategy fails, it's because our people lack the skills or the will to do the work. And with some of my friends, we talk about this as we're sort of hating the player, not the game. But what if the game is actually rigged against them? So the breakthrough can actually come when we realize that this isn't just a people problem, it's also a design problem. Now, as I join you from my standing desk today, I think of this in terms of ergonomics. So we all understand physical ergonomics. We wouldn't give our employees a chair that is known to cause back pain and then get frustrated when they can't focus. We actually design our physical tools to fit the person. Yet often in our organizations, we do the opposite. So I call this practice psychological ergonomics. So this means that, going through the act of actually aligning our organizational systems with the fundamental principles of human psychology. Because especially as we look at something like performance management, we've been designing for these idealized, rational employees who frankly don't exist. And then we get surprised when real social, emotional humans don't behave as we expected them to. So that's what brings us to this new paradigm of performance engineering. And it's the discipline of applying sort of the rigor of organizational science to intentionally design a work context where high performance and strategy execution become the natural default outcomes. Now, we know that organizations are not technical systems. They're complex social systems. And individual performance isn't just a function of personal talent, it's also an emergent property of the context that you design for that talent. So your greatest leverage point isn't managing individual behaviors one by one, it's engineering the entire system, the culture, the work design, and the infrastructure in a way that makes high performance the path of least resistance. Now, at the epicenter of this design challenge, the most broken and also the most powerful system in your entire organization is performance management. Now, if you think about it, your performance management system is like the operational engine of your strategy. It's the clearest signal that your organization sends about what really matters. And right now, for most of us, that engine is sputtering. It consumes thousands of hours, generates deep frustration, and it produces data that frankly nobody trusts. So why is this problem so intractable? Al and I were just talking before we got started that, he has videos and I have, transformation that work that I did in performance management from over a decade ago. And that was at a time where all organizations were trying to take a fresh look and, kind of throw the old playbook out. So yet here we are again, right? So why is this problem so intractable? Well, ultimately, it's because we ask one monolithic process to do three fundamentally conflicting jobs at once. Now, first, it's a decision support tool for fair pay and promotions, and these are decisions that ultimately require objective judgment. Second, it's a compliance tool for legal documentation. And third, it's a development tool for coaching and growth, which we know requires psychological safety. So here's the core conflict. The high stakes evaluative context that you require for fair pay is toxic to the psychological safety required for genuine learning. The moment a conversation is tied to salary, our brain perceives social threat. And that triggers a fight or flight response that literally shuts down the parts of our brain that we need for reflection and growth. So this isn't a software problem. It's not a software solve. It's a neuroscience problem. So trying to solve all of these needs in a single system just ignores human psychology and ultimately the realities of social systems. So to serve any of these needs well, we need to separate them and design a solution that actually is fit for purpose. But because we ignore the basic psychological reality, we get a predictable crisis of confidence. So our managers are frustrated. They're forced into a game of inflating ratings to avoid interpersonal conflict. And this isn't a failure of character, which is how we normally treat it. It's a rational response to a social dilemma that we've actually designed by the way that we've created the systems. Our employees are anxious. They end up viewing any feedback as a potential threat. And our executives, well, we're left with flawed data. Ultimately, we're unable to confidently answer the most basic talent questions. As one leader told me with a lot of deep resignation, I could predict every time what the outcome of our rating cycle is going to look like before it starts. And when your most strategic process is completely predictable, it's not strategic anymore. It's just a ritual. Now, the trouble is that this isn't a problem that we can solve with incremental fixes. Changing the rating scales, adding different competencies, or buying new software, it's ultimately just bandages on a fundamentally broken design. So the only way out is to actually stop trying to build a better appraisal system and start trying to engineer a new one. Now, for this, where I recommend starting is a subtraction audit. We need to put every component of our current process on trial and ask one ruthless question. Does this activity demonstrably improve the quality of our most critical resource and talent decisions? So you can think about, all of the hours spent on things like written self-assessments, numerical rating scales, 360 feedback that's used for evaluation purposes. And ask yourself that question. Is it helping us make better resource and talent decisions? And if it's not, if you can't prove its value with some sort of evidence, it's time to eliminate it. So we have to work backwards from the purpose, not forwards from our existing processes. So a decision-driven performance system unbundles these conflicting goals into three distinct evidence-based streams. So it stops asking the question of how did they score and starts asking what business decision are you trying to make? So I'll offer three here that I think pretty much every business is having to answer the question of. Now, the first is manage. So here, the question is which employees require intervention. You focus on documenting concrete performance deficits to create clear, defensible support plans that mitigate risk. And ultimately, most organizations already have a separate process for this. For poor performance, it involves a performance improvement plan and things like that. So this should really be just further, adding to documentation for that separate process. The second is recognize. Here the question is who delivered exceptional impact and deserves differential rewards. We stop relying on inflated ratings and start collecting evidence of concrete above and beyond accomplishments. This allows us to confidently identify and retain our true star performers who research shows can be up to 8 times more productive in complex roles. And the third question is promote. So who has demonstrated the capability to succeed at the next level? Here we gather demonstrated evidence of the readiness. And this allows us to build a robust succession pipeline based on demonstrated ability in the requirements for success at the next level. So what does this look like in practice? Well, it means shifting the entire conversation from scores to objective impact. Instead of asking managers to rate someone on a vague competency like collaboration, we ask them to provide concrete examples. So share an instance where this person's collaboration led to a measurable business outcome. At the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to get to, and it moves the conversation from arguing over a 3.7 versus a 3.8 to discussing the actual value that an employee creates. And we can now use technology, specifically AI, to help us supercharge this process. We can use AI to analyze the qualitative data at scale, these what we call critical incidents, spot patterns, detect biases, and reduce the administrative burdens on the managers. which frees them up to do the thing that technology can't, have rich human developmental conversations. So at Fractional Insights, we've wrestled with these issues and navigated these tensions between the operational necessities of the business and the physics of the people and the organizations that make it challenging. So our teams developed solutions across sectors and at organizations like Google, Meta, Intel, Lilly, and in the public sector. And through that experience, we've found that designing your best fit solution functions, evaluation, development, and decisions separately, while ensuring that each of those three solutions aligns with human psychology and strategic needs, helps you cut wasted time and leads to better decisions. So this is what we call performance engineering. To engineer performance in a human system, you have to design it in a way that works with human nature, not against it. So that's where our methodology, psychological ergonomics, comes in. And when you engineer the system in this way, the ROI can be pretty profound. So organizations that have made this shift have seen a really significant, 40 to 60% reduction in administrative time, significant increases in manager confidence in the decisions that are being made, and a significant jump in employee perceptions of fairness. But ultimately, the real impact is strategic because it allows you to gain a superior ability to identify and retain your top talent. And you can create a culture where innovation, which frankly is typically punished in our traditional systems, can actually be recognized and rewarded. So it allows you to build a real competitive advantage that's rooted in the very design of your people system. So what I'm going to leave you with is that your most vital role as a leader in the 21st century isn't just to be the steward of human resources, but it's really to be the chief engineer of your human system. The question isn't, how do we just better manage our people, but really, how do we build a better context for them to succeed? So stop asking your people to thrive in a system that's really not set up for success, and start engineering a system where they can't help but succeed. All right, that's all I have, and would love to hear your thoughts on the topic too, Al.
Shonna, I'm just sitting here the whole time, jumping up and down. I'm smiling. Because you're so spot on. It's been such a frustrating journey over the years where, to your last point, we've been asking employees to be resilient, to perform, to be engaged, and they're oftentimes functioning in a system that does not honor their unique contributions. And that is either a conscious decision that leaders choose to ignore, or it's a blind spot, which they do not address. And that conflict zone persists, if not expands. So I'm so happy that you called that out. And that's where I would like to start with my question. As you were talking, I think about the idea that leaders have different latitudes. You've heard me talk about the dimensionality of change. At what level does change happen? Sometimes it happens at executive level, sometimes it happens at a process or function level, and arguably down to the team level. I've seen too many times this particular process, performance management, performance appraisal, happen at a functional level without the broader view of how it's impacting the employee experience. So can you talk about the need to get to the right altitude to design this system to set the organization up for success?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important question, Alan. It's tricky, right? Because I think both are needed. You have to have that high level philosophy of performance in your organization. You have to have the clarity on the strategy and where, what does this all ladder up to in terms of our competitive differentiators, and how are we going to win as a business, and what matters here. And the reality is your R&D org is different than your operations org. And this geography is different from the other geography. And so questions about systems design and governance like become tricky. And so, the example that I can use on that is, again, like back to, in the olden days, like you and I were talking about, I think it was about 11, 12 years ago that I led my first really enterprise-wide performance management transformation. And we had looked at the sort of history of performance management or performance appraisal in that organization. There was actually a historian that had tracked over 70 years of performance appraisals, and they had tried everything from 0 points on a rating scale, like there was no ratings, to 100 points, and you could watch the pendulum swing over time, right? Between lots of granularity and differentiation to none at all. And every 3 to 5 years, they had ripped and replaced the performance appraisal system because they saw the same thing happening every time. A lot of ratings inflation or not enough information to make the decisions they had to make. So every 3 to 5 years, it was gone. So what we put into place was this very first principles based minimalist system with the goal of saying, like, here is, we're going to capture the organization's philosophy on performance, but leave room for the function, the geography, all of that to tailor it to what really matters there. And by doing so, it's already been 8 years, and not only is it still in place, but it's being expanded, right? To now will be impacting, over 2 million people. So when I was chatting with the folks who are now in charge of that, we were, kind of reflecting on, like, why has it lasted? Why has it survived? And I think it's this whole notion of, like, freedom within boundaries and picking the right level of structure and specificity without over designing. And that's really hard to do, especially in such a core system where people have a lot of impassioned views.
Yeah, there's so many places we can go with that. I want to share an idea with you. So this is a bit off script, and I just glanced over here to see if it was currently live on my website because it was on an older website. It's an article I wrote probably 15, if not longer, many years ago, longer ago. What's the proper English? But it was entitled "Performance Management is Stupid." And it was meant to be inflammatory because I found it absurd that we knew it was disengaging both the person who's being reviewed as well as the reviewer, him or herself. And that research in particular is over 20 years old. So it's like, okay, what are we lacking here? Are we lacking creativity? Are we the inertia of the past? Are we just going to what we know? And we have technologies that are perpetuating legacy processes that's starting to change, thankfully. But here's where I'll land is to design something that's appropriate for our organization at that point in time, yet is also going to be enduring. So it's not going to be whiplash year after year. That takes time and space and getting the right people in the room, aka governance and leader decision making. In your experience, what is that? And I do have a follow-on question, which I'll reserve for a bit. But what does that space look like? Who's in the room, and what should they be designing for?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I mean, I think you're right. It takes time and space and intentionality, and that's something that I think we're all wanting for, and also feels like a luxury these days. I think there's so much pressure to move faster, go faster. But in my experience, where it starts is really getting that, like, high level, like, what is our philosophy on this? Like, what are the decisions we need to make and the problems we need to solve? And really aligning on that and getting clarity on it. And I found that, like, frankly, that's the senior leadership team. And so this is why, like, I mean, yes, it's expensive to pay consultants and to come in and help facilitate these processes. The expense that I find people have the hardest time with is just the cost of time on this.
Mm,
And particularly when you have, again, like people coming in from different lenses and angles on the business and having to kind of come into alignment on what's most important for this, especially given the realities of shoulds don't work in
yeah.
performance management. So, like for example, I think you and I are in agreement that part of the reason why performance management is stupid is because we're trying to do these three pretty distinct things all at once in ways that just frankly don't work. So we're asking people to be a judge and a lawyer and a coach all at once in one process. And so, that's just really, really hard to do and do well. And then you especially think at scale at the
Yeah.
level of an enterprise. Um, and when I tell people all those things are important and you do have to do all these things, you have to develop people, you have to, protect the business, mitigate risk, and you have to make decisions about your resources, but you need to do it separately. The pushback I normally hear is, but they're all related. Like you can't do one without the other. And I'm like, you can't do one without the other in its effect, but you can in terms of its process. And
Mm.
it's really important that you do. And so that's where I think it's like we get stuck in it and it stays stupid because it makes sense that they should go together, but it just doesn't work.
Well, yes, you're right. We do absolutely agree. And I think there's a lot of not only HR professionals who agree, but managers and those who have been reviewed. There's like, this doesn't feel right, and the outcomes aren't right. And there's this cynicism that has been built up that's arguably justifiable that, hey, this is not celebrating me. It's not honoring my contributions. There's this comparative uh, embeddedness that creates friction internally within a team potentially. So, what is more appropriate? Now, before I ask that formally of you, I just want to call out that a lot of the narrative on this has been driven by the vendor community. And also, you layer in what leaders know. It's like, okay, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years and, got to do that. And that's all I know. And the technologies enable that process. So to break from it takes fortitude, not only by an individual leader, but by a leadership team to think differently. So, my pointed question is given the technologies that are out there that perpetuate this legacy process that has this conflict zone, in the center of it, what would you advocate? And because for me, when I hear performance engineering, it's design thinking, it's systems design, which means stepping back and thinking about the experience that you want to create, and then in turn selecting the technologies that will deliver on that experience. So your thoughts on what that decision making process needs to look like?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it may be like my own personal limitations and simplicity, but I feel like we can simplify all of this, right? And it's really just starting with like the needs of the business and saying like, what do we need it to do? What are the decisions we need to make, and what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And again, like usually when I talk to organizations about that, like there's some variation and the words are different, but it's the same kind of things. Like we need to know who is needs to leave the organization, right? Like where are their performance deficits? We need to figure out like how to intervene, what's the root cause, like all of that. But again, like that's the minority of our organizations. It's usually 10% or so of our organizations where people just it's not a good fit for whatever reason. Um, Second thing is we need to figure out like where are we seeing this like gold star performance where it's not just about like recognizing and rewarding that performance to incentivize, but it's also being able to show transparently to the rest of the organization, like this is what we mean. Like this is what high performance is. This is what good looks like. This is where the bar is.
Mhm.
And most of the time, our organizations are missing that opportunity to transition the resources they're expending on rewards from an individual reward to a cultural norm,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? But that's totally possible with transparency in what those examples are.
Well, let me take what you just shared, and I want to go deeper on this particular point that I believe, in my experience, has been a huge gap. And 20 plus years on, it's a source of frustration. And I'm like, what can I do differently to influence those that I am gifted with influencing in a more constructive way? And it's this: is that you've heard me share first two, then what? And that's my philosophy going back to Jim Collins and others. It's like you get the right people in the room and then you figure stuff out, and again that creates space, that creates framing the conversation appropriately, because I just I would hate to be 5-10 years down the road, particularly given where we are in the world and how inelastic organizations are. Like it's bad for the organization, it's bad for people, so we gotta like figure this out in a way that is going to be sustainable. So the level of specificity I'd like to ask you about, of the organizations that have done well in this regard, or maybe there's none that jump to mind, in an ideal future state to set up something like, who's in the room? Is it an offsite where you're spending a day or two doing it? Is it a part of a decision-making process? Part of maybe your quarterly business reviews where you find out that, hey, this isn't working, therefore we're going to spend a day or two to, figure this out, virtually. What is that process of designing, performance engineering, if you will? What does that look like in the ideal sense?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I mean, in my experience, it's starting with actually getting the senior leadership team together. And a lot of that is like ultimately you need to decide, what are you trying to get to? What are you trying to accomplish? And then how's it going right now? So we always start with the business case. And it's interesting because actually, the first time I did this, the mandate was actually not to dramatically, transform performance management. It was, this isn't working. It's never worked. At least make it take less time to not work.
Hmm.
So it was basically like a do no harm mandate, just reduce the burden.
Hmm.
But as we got in there and we actually started, meeting with the senior leaders and trying to understand, like, okay, but is it serving the business's purpose, whether it's thousands and thousands of hours, which most companies are spending, or 10 hours, like are they being well used? Is it getting you something in the end? And typically when you start investigating that, like, yes, you want to make it more efficient, but you also want to make it better. Like
Yeah.
you also want people to feel like it's fair and trust the decisions and, ultimately not be getting in the way of development, which is actually where the performance improvement happens. Um, and so that's where you end up expanding the business case to say, like, okay, don't come up with 10 goals, 20 goals. Like 1 to 3 is good. Like what are we aiming for? And then you move into the design phase. And the design phase starts with a subtraction audit, as I said, because I think people, like, even if they don't like what they have today, you start trying to change it. Like people like change, they don't like to be changed. So like if you really have to like get people on board to say, again, like, given what we established with the senior leadership team on, like, this is what this has to do for us, how are all these things that we're doing serving those needs? and and that gets people into really, like, a little bit more willing to let go of some of the stuff that's just not delivering value. So you go into the design phase, and then ultimately And that's, again, you have to have input from the managers and the leaders, and on where the pain points are and what's going well, opportunities. And then ultimately it's really like planning out the change management of implementation. So business case, design, and implementation phases.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I want to just share this idea with you and get your reaction, because when you say senior leaders, historically, what that has meant for some is that we're going to get some HR leaders in the room, we're going to figure it out, and we're going to throw it back to the business and hope it hits the mark. For me, I sense what you're referring to there is not only HR, but operations, finance, legal, the CIO,
Yeah,
anyone
no,
who's going to be in this process, because they're all key stakeholders. And that's different, at least in my experience, than what has historically been the case, where it's been largely an HR
yeah,
initiative. So can you speak to the cross-functional
yeah, that
necessity of having the right people?
thank you for clarifying, Al, because you're right. I think that is where most people's heads go. It's like, great, your HR LT gets together and they do this. No, I am talking about your ELT. I am talking about your executive leadership team, top of the organization, the people who, at the end of the day, are reporting to shareholders on, you know, business performance, because this is the engine for that, right? So it matters. And at the end of the day, this is the system that connects to your compensation decisions. Again, 70% of your budget most of the time going to human capital. And so like you need the CFO in the room and really coming to alignment on like what are the decisions we need to make and how are we going to make them. Because even as you get down to, when you're making these decisions about manage, promote, and reward, we're going to have to ask the hard questions about how do we make those decisions. And often that is part of what gets skipped. I've had conversations with really brilliant, accomplished leaders who say, like, the hardest part of this is, like, what does good look like? Like, how are we making that decision? And frankly, if we as leaders can't get explicit about how that's being made, how do we expect our employees to act on what good looks like if we can't tell them what it is, right? So we have to take the time to get on the same page about that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for emphasizing that point as well, because if you have the right people in the room, they're senior leader, they're responsible for the culture, and then things can actually stick. And the thing that I want to now ask you, as we got a couple few more questions, and if you're listening, by all means, ask your question. We'll get to as many as we can. It's this: is that I have seen a reluctance to truly be creative. Like they default to what they know. And so I've long said there's been a crisis of clarity in what they want, a crisis of creativity, and a crisis of confidence to move forward. And in this day and age, the cost of that is, in my view, if I'm a shareholder in an organization, is unacceptably high, both for the culture, for the shareholders, customers, all that down the line. So what is your view? Like when you talk about performance engineering, what I hear is that you're calling out the need to design a system that's going to set everybody up for success. Then it invites the question, what are we designing? And just to plant a potential response, and you can push back on it if you like, is that yes, there are some innovative ideas and emerging ideas out there that you can cling on to, but also engaging with a subject matter expert on human and organizational behavior. I know a couple doctors of biopsychology who can help with that. But I mean, in all seriousness, whether
Yeah.
it be you and Aaron or somebody, we've spent a career and an educational experience or two or three to learn about these human dynamics. And if that insight and those ideas aren't leveraged, in my view, that's irresponsible. That's just guessing and hoping things work out and just kind of telling everybody to suck it up. But if you do leverage the subject matter expertise and ideate and create something that's appropriate for the system for which you're responsible as a leader at that point in time, then good things can happen. So the pointed question again, the room for creativity in this, and engaging subject matter experts like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I look at this is we have so much science, we have so much research on how people work, how organizations work, and in some ways, I think sometimes we're relying only on creativity. Like we'll figure it out, we'll design it for our system and get people in the room and and that's okay, but also you don't have to do that from scratch. Like we actually know a lot about probabilistically what will work better or what will work less, and so I think it's combining the willingness to start fresh and not getting mired in some of these old approaches that may have worked, well, they may have never worked, or they may have worked better when we were in the industrial era, but we're we're moving into this space where we're really like rebuilding our organizations from the ground up with AI, for example. We know that it has to be like deeply integrated to really get the returns that we're looking for. Um, and it does not make sense to automate and scale things that never worked. And so, I talked to some organizations that are looking at, for example, how to integrate AI into their performance management systems. And I'm all for doing that in smart ways that take into account, what people are good at and willing to accept and what technology is good at. Um, but my caution is like if you start with taking this fundamentally broken approach and doing that faster and more with AI, like you're going to end up in the same place, right? So, you know, trying to capture these ratings that never helped us, like on a faster basis with the technology, isn't going to get you there. So I really encourage people, to your point, Al, to like try to step back, think creatively about like what do we actually need now, and if we were going to start from a blank canvas, what would we design?
Mhm. Okay. I mean, I love it for a host of reasons, not only so leadership teams can function more confidently, but they can create employee experiences and systems and environments that can set them up for success, going back to where we started. So a couple more questions and then we'll wrap. In terms of the performance engineering and specifically psychological ergonomics, I mean, you obviously, when we talk about ideas, you have some in partnership with you have more because when you said something earlier which we'll talk about later, but like yeah, you're one person in all this, but you have an uncommon level of depth in the research as well as experience with those processes that have worked well and those that haven't. And so psychological ergonomics at the end of it, you can you elaborate a bit more on what is it and why it's valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I sometimes I feel like I almost like have this like the secret of the universe in terms of organizations. Like we've got all this science on like what makes people tick. And so 100+ years of research on things like motivation and like what do people want? What do they need? Right. And there's a lot of different versions of it and a lot of different models. And again, my simple mind, like I'm trying to simplify this and boil it down to three things. Every person universally has a innate need for security. Am I safe? Growth. Am I moving, evolving, growing, living into my potential? And significance, which is do I matter? Does my work matter? So security, growth, and significance. So we can take all this complexity of humans and say, okay, if people need these three things, how do we design the world around them and their work and their jobs and the organizational structures to meet those needs? Because even if we don't care about the people, if I need you to help me accomplish this goal, if your needs aren't met, security, growth, and significance, it creates angst that just gets in the way. It mucks it up. I mean, you think about something like AI transformation. If your people are busy being fearful or paranoid, or concerned or distracted or confused, like that is getting in the way of you getting to, your goal of transforming your organization for, the sake of efficiency and customer value.
Yeah.
So you've got to remove that friction, right? So psychological ergonomics is really just about, just as, I have my own ergonomic chair because I don't want to be distracted while I'm working of like my back hurting or not being able to see, my monitor at the right level, or wrist pain. Like we can design our systems to meet our psychological needs because frankly, like we're in the factory days, and my grandfather was a coal miner. It was physical risk that was the primary risk at work for most of us. And there certainly are still plenty of those jobs that are incredibly valuable, but for most of us now, in the knowledge economy era, it's our psychology, but we haven't done the same, updating like our design approaches the way that we have with our physical bodies.
I love the metaphor. It's sticky. It's more than appropriate, and I certainly celebrate you and Aaron bringing that to the world because I'm, again, I don't want to be 5, 10 years down the road and having the exact same conversation again. We've been through this a few times over the past 20 years. And I think now's the time, particularly given what's happening in the world externally and the technologies that are available, we need to design processes that are appropriate and how to do that. Uh, there's ways that are less risky than others. And so I really, really appreciate you sharing. There's more to come on this topic and, related topics. How can listeners, viewers learn more about you and what you're doing there at Fractional Insights?
Well, I definitely recommend heading to our website, fractionalinsights.ai. And there you can sign up for our newsletter, but also we have our research insights reports on things like angst. We have a new one coming on AI angst specifically. So if you join the newsletter, you'll know when that comes out. But you can also download the reports. We have a whole series of white papers on a variety of topics related to organizational performance. And please find me on LinkedIn. So Shonna Waters on LinkedIn, and Aaron Etaw is my co-founder. And we would love to, interact with you there. And we both try to post pretty regularly. So.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And a lot of the content that you're sharing will be in the Future of Work Advisors newsletter and on our related platform, adaptivefutures.io. So again, Shauna, thank you for being your awesome self and sharing like you do. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Al.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining as well. All right, bye-bye.